Hello and welcome to Post Point, our Anything and Everything podcast.
I'm Stephen Gonzalez, Editor-in-Chief.
I'm Maddie Ashcraft, Managing Editor.
I'm Bree, reporter.
I'm Kiara Anderson, photojournalist.
I'm Braden Hendrickson, videographer.
This quarter we're really covering environmentalism, a topic that is something that's been talked about a lot in large media, but it's also something that we're still trying to figure out how to cover it as a whole, as a community. So kind of getting started having a conversation about what's the point of environmentalism? Why do we need it? Why should we take part in this whole movement to take better care of our earth? What does that look like? That's what we're getting into today. I feel like the environmentalism sort of avenue that we're going down, both for print and for online, is a really important topic. And maybe it's just because it's close to my heart, but the whole idea of like being eco-friendly and sustainability is something that I think is coming up much more often in different conversations people are having, whether it comes to like food choices or fast fashion or all of these, or making the college green. These sort of topics are coming up very often in communities and online, so I think it's really important for us to take part in that conversation because there's a lot out there.
Being care about the environment is very important because if you go just to Point of Environmentalism, you see sculptures from plastics and things found in the ocean. And it's just depressing to even think about our animals dying because people don't cut up the plastic things around the cans, or just don't care about anything, and people throw the cigarettes out the window. And that's how some fires have been caused this past summer, was when people just weren't caring and throwing the cigarettes out the window.
It's definitely a topic to think about in the future. There's so many things that have happened either with wildfires or tornadoes and hurricanes, and played a big effect on the community or the entire world pretty much. So
yeah, it's funny. I'm taking environmental science right now, and one of the things we've been covering is what cost-effective means in the mind of a rational human being. And I think that concept is a big reason for why there's so much littering and why there's so much of a disdain towards protecting our environment. And it's because most of the time when someone's doing something that hinders our world in the grand scheme or the smaller scheme of things, it really doesn't affect them at all in the short term. I mean, Professor Handler used the example of littering, and I think that's apropos. It was apropos then and it's apropos now, because when someone litters, they stand to lose nothing from that and stand to gain everything from that. They gain, sure, and it's just a couple of seconds in which they don't have to go find a trash can or anything, but they lose nothing at all from doing that. They can legitimately discard something and go about their day, and they're not the one who has to pick it up, or the animal that might have to suffer from it, or they've washed their hands of the situation effectively. And if one or two people were doing that, that'd be a thing. But as proven, the rational-minded human being more often than not will do that. They will all act as that. So when you consider that and the amount of people who live on this planet and how many of them, starkly the majority are doing that, it becomes a much bigger issue. Hence why you can look out any window and you're liable to see some trash. I see a box in the distance from where I'm sitting right now that's just hanging out, and there's a dumpster not too far from it, but there it is.
And like last week when I was going to the bathroom, somebody dropped a cup of coffee, and nobody thought about to pick up any part of it. And when I saw that, I picked up what I could get to.
it's very common on hiking trails and stuff like that. Usually the hiking community is pretty good with picking up stuff, but if you go on trails that the common person who wants to go on a day hike would go on, like I went on one yesterday and picked up like 3 beer bottles and 5 cans just in a 3-mile trail. So it definitely is effective on all of nature pretty much.
I definitely think that with the amount of trash that we've been seeing recently around the city and just around like the world in general, it's why it's so important that we get news pieces like this out there, because just like Steven said, it doesn't affect us negatively right now and today, but it'll start affecting us quite soon in the future, and it could affect the way our grandchildren's have to live in the world, or how our great grandchildren will have to live in the world. And I mean, you see all these jokes on Twitter and stuff that are like, what are you gonna do in the next 30 years? And people are like, huh, you think we're gonna have a world to live on in the next 30 years? You're funny. And it's like, yeah, those are funny, but when you really think about it, it's actually quite serious, and it's a harsh reality that we're gonna have to face if we don't start making a change. And that's why these news articles are just so vital to get out there.
Well, and I think it goes back to like more than just like, oh, we're not going to litter, we're going to throw something in the trash. It's way more than just saying, oh, I'm going to recycle something. I know for even really trying to get down the track of environmentalism right now, but that's okay. I mean, it really goes back to like how much waste you're producing from the beginning. Like, are you choosing every time to like go out and use a disposable coffee cup like 3 times a day? And, you know, are you using all of this plastic and stuff that we really just can't recycle? This is that sort of thing. I mean, I'm getting into like the eco-friendly type person. But those are the sorts of things that you start with from the beginning. You're asking those questions like, am I, you know, just littering, or am I like being the cause that's producing the waste to litter?
Mm-hmm. Another sad reality to it is I've always kind of thought that no matter how much the rest of us recycle daily and just incorporate that into our everyday routine, I think some of the biggest offenders of waste are obviously big billionaire companies that are just pumping out all this waste into oceans and landfills, and I mean they're just throwing all their waste wherever they can. And it's like when you recycle one cup, at the same time this company has just poured out gallons and gallons of toxic waste into the oceans, you know. And it's sometimes it's kind of, it makes people feel like, why am I even doing this when you have people doing it 10 times as worse in the opposite direction of my one tiny step forward.
Yeah, because if for every 1 step forward, we take 2 steps back.
I think 2 would be putting it lightly.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to take in that kind of the gravity of what you just said, Kiki, that, you know, you could be doing everything right, and for every one person that's doing that like you, there's, you know, a plethora of people doing the opposite, and it really does kind of start to make you feel like your points are invalid and it's not worth doing. But I think it's a matter of refocusing your efforts on the same subject but in a different direction, because yes, it's important to do your part to make sure that, you know, your carbon footprint is as small as it possibly is. You're not using things that are going to affect the environment negatively, but at the same time, it's equally, if not more important, in my opinion, to make sure that ideals and philosophies like that are being spread amongst those around you. Because whether or not you make it your mission to do the right thing really doesn't matter in the grand scheme unless you're imparting that sort of wisdom and that lifestyle choice onto those around you.
No, I mean, and if like exactly what Steven's saying, it's really a grassroots movement kind of right now of that we've spent so many years and over the past couple of generations just really not cared about the way that we're treating our environment and not cared about the waste we're producing. But it is that thing of connecting with other people and those sorts of grassroots movements that end up changing entire societies and ways that we look at things. I compare it to like people who vote, of when you actually vote, there's times when like 50, 60 votes will like change whether or not some senator gets into the government or that sort of thing. And so that thing of spreading it among other people and making that choice to do what's right does have an effect in the long run. It's like, what are you geared towards? What is your focus on?
Yeah, because like I paid close attention to all the election results, and only one of the initiatives for the Seattle PR, for one of the big initiatives, passed only by 60 votes. And so there was a recount, and also I know all over the world there was people recounting votes of who got elected because the margin of error was so close.
I do completely agree, though, that if everybody lived life with the mentality of my one decision won't make a great impact, then we would have gotten nowhere in a lot of really important battles that this country has overcome, you know? I mean, considering things like civil rights movements, I mean, if one person might have made a big change, but if that one person had just been like, I'm not going to do anything, things could be a lot different today. And I think that's why we do have to remember that, yeah, we can't do it by ourselves, but because you've stepped out, it might give someone else the courage to step out with you, and then that's how you start making a chain reaction, and that's how you create real movements.
I think it's equally important to also, you know, in a very tactful way, call people out that are kind of part of the problem. A big social trap we have in our country is called tragedy of the commons, and that's when a person will abuse something that's a common pool resource for everyone around them, and they don't think it'll be a big effect in the long run because, you know, it's like, you know, a drop of bleach in a pool of water in the grand scheme. It's not really affecting anything. But if other people are doing that, if other people are taking notice and realizing that they could effectively cheat the system in a way that gives them, you know, extra benefits and doesn't affect them so much as it becomes a price that everyone has to pay, they're far more willing to do it. And it's important to preach this message that we need to be doing our part to better our society and our world around us, but we also need to recognize those who aren't, and we need to make sure that it's understood why this has to be done. And that's why it's so pivotal that we do what we're doing. The Puyallup Post isn't out there picking up trash and recycling and aiding our environment in a hands-on method, so to speak, but it's equally important to get this message out. This message that in a lot of ways has become both diluted and oversaturated at the same time, because people are so used to hearing this at this point that they're like, yeah, I get it. Let me protect the planet. Got it. That's what we should be doing. But at the same time, nobody's sure really the effective ways they can go about doing that, or they just don't care because they've heard the message so many times, or the message just has a negative stigma because it gets attached to this vision people have of these tree-hugging, environmental, like non-shoe wearing hippies that have marriage ceremonies with the nature around them and stuff. And you don't have to go that far into the unknown to do your part to make the society a little bit of a better place. I'm not slipping out of my size 11s anytime soon, so I don't think it doesn't have to be that big of a deal that people make it out to. Our world's so satisfied with black and whites that there's so much gray for us to explore, and sometimes that's kind of the path we need to take to make things better.
Well, like, the waste that's been put out is very polluting. There's also a lot of different other pollutions that have been going on. I mean, obviously air quality, but then, like, being in astronomy, there's a big thing with light pollution too, with how fast everything is growing. There's so many lights in cities, and like 80% of Americans cannot see the Milky Way anymore from where they live. And it's just insane because there's so many places. I've had a friend that taught in Africa, and you could read a book because the stars were so bright. And I think that while we are growing, we still need to worry about the sky because it affects animals and it affects a lot of other things.
That's actually a really interesting point that you brought up, because I didn't actually know that light pollution was a thing. As much as I do care for the planet, I just didn't know that existed. And it is crazy I've never seen the Milky Way. I'm a city person. I grew up in the city. So I didn't know people could just see the Milky Way from their backyards either, or the stars could be bright enough for you to read at night, because when it gets dark, it's dark.
Yeah. It's definitely, I mean, I've never been to a true dark sky place, but I live out pretty far from a city and I can see the Milky Way, but then if I just drive 15 minutes down the road, it's already 5 times worse than what my backyard is. And then if I go up to Mount Rainier, it's 10 times brighter than the city would be. So it's crazy how much just a single house can put off for light pollution.
Yeah, I remember my first time camping out in the Mojave Desert, and I was surrounded by people, but we didn't have any kind of lights or anything like that going on. And I just remember looking up and seeing all the stars, and it felt very, it felt very fantasy-esque. It was very unrealistic, and I'm from the city too, and so it was just weird to look up and go, oh yeah, we do have such wondrous things around us that we don't often get to see because we blind ourselves to it with our own industry and innovations that sometimes can cause more harm than good.
Yeah, and I remember the lunar eclipse I watched when I was a little kid years ago at church. And even recently, lunar eclipses have been getting harder and harder to see from backyards. And I was at a church that was very big and had 5 buildings, and lights were on all of the buildings. And I could still see a lunar eclipse, but now with how even light has getting brighter and brighter with the LED lights, it's getting harder to see the eclipses that are very important for science and learning.
Yeah, I mean, the moon is so bright, but with lunar eclipses, when it starts to dim, people don't try to get out and see them anymore. It's people kind of neglected what our sky is like in astronomy. It's we have one coming up January 20th, and there hasn't seemed to have been much hype on it. It's people don't talk about it or any of that stuff.
Those darn kids and their moon neglect.
No, those darn kids and the neglect for going outside.
Yeah.
Truth, yeah.
Oh, that's a whole different podcast.
Yeah.
Really, what this all comes down to is everybody's understanding of accountability, that we all are accountable for taking care of the world around us, and we should strive to be doing better. And that doesn't have to come at the cost of anything really that would impede your lifestyle. realistically. I'm still able to do the things I love to do while at the same time not making things more difficult for the world and the people around me. And at the very least, I think that's what is expected of you, to not, be a waste of resources and finances and natural, wondrous things around us on the people around you. I was raised in a household where you pulled your weight and you weren't a drain on people in your area, and it's so funny because you go out to the real world and see how many people are causing problems that other people have to clean up, and here we are trying to do the same thing, our part to make sure that people understand that at the end of the day you have so much of an effect on the world around you, and you can do so much by honestly just choosing to refrain from doing certain things. Yeah, we've been a bit all over the place talking about the environment, but I think that has everything to do with the fact that there's so many different angles you can take when having this discussion that it never feels like we've truly covered it enough. And I'd argue that we probably never will cover it enough. But this whole thing is sort of us saying that we're going to do our hardest to make sure we're giving it the coverage it deserves this quarter. And as we make these changes, as you could remember last quarter, we worked with the PPD. As we make these big changes in our infrastructure, we hold on to these things and we implement them throughout the rest of our time. So we worked hard with the police department in the local area to get content together to really showcase the stuff they were doing. And now they've become, part and parcel with what the Puyallup Post hopes to accomplish. And this is hopefully going to be the same way with the environment, that even though we might not be able to make these big covering stories in future quarters like we're going to try to do this quarter, we're going to try to keep the environment and environmentalism as a whole in the uppermost of our list of priorities.
I think we've talked about everything we can about environmentalism today. This has been the Post Point. Thank you for listening. Make sure to follow us on all of our social media accounts at the Puyallup Post on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.